What I'm going to be talking about today are the new business models that are coming into the new commercial space industry and contrasting those with how space has been done in the past. Unlike a lot of the transformational technologies that happened over the past 100 years, the aeronautical or railroad or the internet, the space industry has pretty much been stuck as a government-only program. There was a perception over the past 100 years, or past 50 years or so, that space is so hard and so expensive that the only organizations that are capable of raising that kind of money and that kind of engineering are governments. Space ends up being so expensive because the government ends up being the only entity that's running it, because what happens is if the government starts out running it, it's running it for different reasons. There was also no competition. The sense of competition that happened in the space industry was basically with Russia, with the Soviet Union and their space program. One of the major issues with the Apollo program was that the goals were never really all that well articulated to creating a space industry. The goal, if you remember John F. Kennedy's speech, the goal was to put a man on the moon in 10 years, ellipsis, specifically for the reasons of beating the Soviet Union there. Once we actually beat them, the entire military, geopolitical reason for sending a man to the moon was accomplished. Same thing with the shuttle. Some of you might remember when the shuttle was originally designed, it went through several iterations based on what its defined goal was. NASA said we're building a truck. Well, in order to justify the tax expenditures, large sections of the design had to be farmed out to different locations around the country to get the votes necessary. So what are the solutions to this? Let's say we went back in time and wanted to say, we don't want to do it this way. It's all about flight rate. Flight rate gets your costs down through economies of scale and amortizes all of your development costs over multiple flights, so you end up getting the cost per flight low. If you can imagine if the demand for flying a Boeing 747 was 1 to 2 planefuls of passengers per year, you would probably only have 2 Boeing 747s in the world, that you would end up with a ticket that would cost several $1 million per person. And no one would ever fly it. And you would not have a viable airline industry. In order to be able to have a flight rate, you have to have a market demand that requires it. So it's a chicken and egg. You can't have the flight rate without the market. Well, the market has to be able to see that there's something there that can actually accomplish that flight rate. And one of the aspects of the way NASA and the government did things never actually had as their goal to create that market demand. For example, if you look at the FAA, they have a chartered requirement to protect public safety, but also advocate for the aeronautical industry. There is no such thing for the space business, for the space industry. NASA's goal is to run the missions themselves. So how come people like me and several other people in our industry think that we can fix this now? What's different? Well, first of all, there's money. There's a lot of dot-com people who cashed out, unlike me, who didn't cash at the right time, but there are a lot of people that did. And because these were Silicon Valley dot-com startups, there's a high concentration of nerds. Additionally, technology has changed. Computers are smaller, cheaper. Material sciences are better. We now have carbon fiber composites. We can drastically cut down on the weight requirements on a launch vehicle. Computer-aided design. If you think about it, Apollo was done with slide rules, pens, and paper. That was it. I remember the fact that Apollo, instead of word processors, they had to have secretarial pools. You know, rooms and rooms and rooms of people with typewriters, typing. And the internet. I don't think mast and space systems could actually do what we do without the internet. Once we get up in space, we can open up the payload bay, eject payloads, expose the payloads to a vacuum. Depending on whether or not we do 120 kilometers or 500 kilometers, you get between 1 and 10 minutes of microgravity. A lot of capabilities with different kind of mission profiles we can do there. We turn around, come back in. We have a heat shield on the bottom. Once we've gotten on the other side of gotten to terminal velocity, and at about 10,000 feet, we restart our engines. decelerate more, and then come in for a soft landing where we took off from.